This is Talking My Walking. I am Rodrigo Ribeiro, and today I'm going to talk about how culture shapes and limits how we perceive ourselves and the world, and why it matters. What shapes our understanding of ourselves and the world is not genetics, it is culture. Our behavior also is shaped by culture. Of course, culture evolved because we were able, as living beings, to become to create symbolic language systems and have a high creative imagination that allows us to transform, to use, to create abstract symbols and languages, and to also create tools, build tools to that transform the way we live, and that is important, because without that genetic composition, without it would be impossible to create culture, and that is obvious. But that's not the point. The point is that the explanations, the scientific explanations that try to use evolutionary psychology and evolutionary biology and other fields of knowledge to explain our behavior, it's not because they do not give a contribute, but they are misleading, because culture on human beings is not something, it becomes an organic feature of our identity, because we are biopsychosocial beings, and our biological basis, I mean anatomically and physiologically, it's just one part of our identity as living beings. There is no such thing as a human being that is not cultural. Culture is not optional. Culture doesn't exist outside of us, which means that if we understand culture as something, as a reality that exists outside, that's not part of who we are, we do not understand the human condition, and that for sure has a huge impact on how we perceive ourselves, and it justifies a lot of mistakes and even crimes that we commit in the name of many things that we assume that are not part of us, but they are part of us, and they are cultural. How would we have a self-image, a perception of ourselves, who we are, outside culture? When I talk about culture, That's culture only exists because another feature of our species, which is social, being a social species as we are, maybe the most social species. We don't. I mean, the people who compares the sociability or the society, the human societies, with societies like ants or bees, don't understand that we are, of course, social beings, but our ability to be conscious individuals is as a different society, is part of a different form of society. We could not work as bees that have a totally different form of societal organization. Culture is what allows us to create realities that for us, that are our natural environment, and that's why we adapt to them. That's why we don't see, we have difficulties sometimes to see how dysfunctional these systems can be. We do not think about politics or economics, which means economic theories and systems and political systems and ideologies and science and technology and everything else. We sometimes just do not do not think about it as culture, as part of the cultural process, as realities, as pillars, as something that shapes our reality, shapes how we perceive the world and how we perceive ourselves. And that's why it is important, because all the things that we take for granted are actually part of a process, they have been part of a cultural process that shaped a reality and transformed us, because culture transforms us. Culture becomes part of our. It becomes alive. That's the main thing I'm trying to convey. Of course, culture is not a monolith. There are many different cultures, and there are subcultures, and there are, but those exist. Those that exist outside of us, that are part of a diverse reality, cultural reality, or plural cultural reality. They exist in us, in an individualistic, in an individualized form, in a synthesized form, they are assimilated by us as experience, as living experience, as a living organism that experiences, that has that experience, and that experience is part of our lives, is part of who we become. That's why this that seems to be a private, personal experience is actually a form of sociocultural identity, the building of a psycho-socio-cultural identity. And that is that shapes who we are, that with our idiosyncrasies, of course, but it's always influenced and shaped by the rules of the dominant culture, that usually has to do with the political reality, the economic reality, and of course how society is organized. And we can ask if it's natural, if the way we organize a society in most cases that we just assume it as the default mode, that the society organized class-based or caste-based societies organized hierarchically, and the way we assume it's normal and natural. It is not. It is cultural. It is not genetically induced. It is cultural, but culture is not a reality that is created randomly, which means that it evolves naturally out of the interaction between human beings in the same community. No, that is only part of the story. That for sure, that our traditions, our customs, our habits, the way the food people community collects, and everything that is part of the identity of a community or of a nation, a tribe, an indigenous group, or a country, that is part of that process that has sedimented as culture, is part of a collective, the collective interaction that was not that became the reality that is being passed generation through generation after generation. But that's only part of the story, because the problem with culture is that there are people with the power to not with the power, but with the power, okay, with the power and the ability to shape culture, to shape our cultural reality in ways that we do not. Sometimes we do not understand that reality is being shaped by other people, and we just take it for granted. Culture should produce, human culture should produce a web of trust, justice, and truth. But instead, we have a culture, or many different cultures, but they are all the same. They are all of them. Instead, we have culture or cultures as webs of deception for power and control. And that is an abuse of our social condition, and an abuse on the reciprocity that it entails. And for many of us, exactly because of the problems of the nature of our cultural our cultural nature, we do not grasp it, because we do not really have any incentive to try to analyze our culture in in the many layers and in the perspectives and with lenses that would allow us to deconstruct it, to understand how they really work and why it matters. But if we do not develop these skills, these intellectual and also cultural skills, because we need to use cultural tools and intellectual tools, cognitive tools, to deconstruct and understand the reality where we live, to understand what are the problems, where do they come from, what are the roots of the problems, and why are we stuck? Because there are many people that understand, and they are talking. There are so many shows and YouTube shows and lectures and so many people talking about the problems, our civilizational problems, the problems that humanity faces, and this goes far, because now many people from maybe almost a century ago, but at least since the 70s, that people understand that we have a huge problem. The ecological footprint and the overshoot is a problem, and the only way in order to keep a system that exists, a societal and societal system and the civilizational paradigm that exists, we try to solve it technologically. That we are told and sold the deception that we can solve everything with the advancement, with the scientific research, which means that with knowledge and with technological innovation. So we live under a theocratic regime, the technofixism, technocracism, and there are a lot of words these days. That technofixism is the ideology and theology that we should believe and trust and hope that technology will fix all our problems, all human problems. Then we have the capitalist ideology, okay, that sells us that there is no alternative, and therefore this system is the only one that can solve the problems, that can provide. There is no other alternative for humanity. That this is the only system that works. Okay? Then we have technocracy, which is the system, the system that is based on the dogma of technofixism. So in the technoscientism is about the same thing. It's the ideology. It's a religion that tries to convince us that everything will be fixed. And we have now transhumanism that sells us the idea that we need to update our species for our benefit, of course, or for the benefit of a certain. So this is culture. Okay, what I'm talking about is culture. Is using culture. Is using narratives, powerful narratives, in order to manufacture consent. And that consent is for what? Again, who are the people that has the power and the tools and the resources to produce this culture, these pieces of culture, these narratives that are used to shape our perception about ourselves and about the world? And of course, it shapes our relations with each other and everything else. Who are these people? Who are the people that have the power, that have the resources to pay, to use the professional managerial class, which is a cultural class? You know, this is the political class and the cultural class, and the social class, of course. In order, is not evident that there are people that shapes the world for us. They don't wait us to for our saying. They don't expect. They don't want us to have a saying because we are too stupid. They want to shape it for us in advance. They sell it to us through the process of boiling a frog. It is a process. It's not something that is, they just, okay, they also can use shock and awe, or they can use, they can use the crisis to implement measures that otherwise would be considered too much. So it would be important. I mean, and so many these people, many. I mean, people understand. There are many people that already understand where the problems come from. But most of these people have higher education. They are academics, not mainstream academics, of course, but nonetheless, they are people that have the fortunate to have their life to study and to evolve and understand, but still they are they are biases. I don't see many people understanding, go to the roots of the problems. There are many people already understanding I'm not talking about Marxists and communists and socialists, the people that of course they understand how capitalism works and imperialism works. But I'm talking about people that come more from a liberal, progressive side of the political spectrum, and they but what seems missing, in my opinion, is the reason why people. There is a famous quote which I don't really remember right now, but I'm going to try to paraphrase it. I don't remember the author of it, which goes like that. It is difficult for a man to see when his income is the resources he needs for his living are make them to not see it. Which I mean, this is not exactly the quote. This is far from being the quote. But the point is, one of the main problems is that people tend to be oblivious or to deflect or to deny the reality, the wrongs of a reality when they depend our living, our salaries are depend on that reality. So that's one point, and a very important one. But besides that is this reality, this cultural, this bio, psycho, socio-cultural reality that exists in the form of a living being is not something. It is not something that we can get rid of. It's not something that exists outside of us, that you choose what we want to believe, because that is obviously delusional. That's not how the reality works. We can to a certain extent. Choice exists, okay? I do not deny that choice doesn't exist. But in order to understand the deep roots of what influences our choices and our beliefs, and how we perceive reality, and why do we believe, and why do we not even, we don't need to think about it, we just assume it as natural. Why, that is that's not obviously a choice, part of a choice. When we say that if you don't like it here, you go to China, or if you don't like capitalism, go to North Korea. That is this stupid. This is part of our stupidity when people say things like that, because that's exactly the point. Instead of trying to understand the nature and the roots of the reality where they live, and why things suck, and why there is so much unnecessary suffering that's going on, people try to they defend that reality because supposedly, and according to their patriotic views, the patriotic views of their own country or government, or ideological biases, they do not see, they think and they assume that the reality is like that, and that's perfect, and not perfect, but at least is natural, and it doesn't need to change, or if it needs to change, is not the kind of change that challenges the existing paradigm, which means that it says always about some superficial reforms. And of course, with most reforms, that's the word in it says it all. That reforms is not about change; it's about it's about changing, but changing in order not to change. So culture is to understand the deep reality of anything, we need to look through different perspectives. So we cannot just use a single lens, and that is why we fail to, because most of the time we do not really we get used to perceive reality and us and our relations with reality and and everything else through lenses. Doesn't mean that's on a single lens. It can be more than one, of course, but we just think that's the reality, but it is not, because we are missing perspectives, and that's why we assume a partial reality as the reality. But it's not a reality; it's just a partial reality. And if it's not, if it is difficult to have to understand the whole picture, but in order to, but we need to, but if we really want to have meaningful change, and we think the world deserves a better future, and if you also think that we should have a different political system and economic system, and I'm not talking about the classic Marxist view or communist, socialist, because that's where people are so. This is so weaponized, and there are so many misconceptions that it's better that we. I mean, it's not better that it's not important to talk about it and to use the arguments of Marxist arguments and it's important because it's also one perspective that is important to understand our reality. But the point is, we need really, if we think that there is something that is really wrong and needs to change, we need to come to grips with reality. And if the traditional ways that we, or tools, intellectual and cultural tools that we are, or ideological, that we are using, seem that they are not working, they are not giving answers, it's because we are asking the wrong questions and using the wrong tools. And that is why we need different perspectives, and those perspectives need to come from conscious questioning. To start with, to question our assumptions, the ones that are considered normal. I mean, by normality, I mean dominant. The ones that are supposed to be the default, the ones that we go by default, or we use by default. And that's when the process starts, that we can understand that culture is a much more complex reality than we sometimes than the normal view of it, because we just throw the terms around, we use the concepts, and sometimes we don't give much time to reflect about how those concepts are function in reality. And the point is not to discuss the concepts and the ideas, it's also we have to discuss concepts and ideas and reflect about them, but reflect about them in the ways how they function in the relation they have with reality. I don't want to have an abstract view of a tree and not understanding that the tree, an abstract around the concept of a tree, and do not understand the reality of a tree itself and the context of that reality of that tree, of an ecosystem where trees are part of. So that the reality is always so in this cultural reality needs to be understood as this ecosystem, a psycho-socio-cultural ecosystem, part of a living being. We do not only need to understand culture as the fish would need to understand the water where he swims in the fish bowl, or in the lake or ocean or river or wherever. We need to understand culture also how it operates as part of our living organism, as part of who we are, but not only in an abstract way, in an intellectual way, but in the understanding that it is part of us in biological terms. It exists on us. It is part of us as our mental life. And our mental life as a biological substract. It doesn't exist separated from our body. And these misconceptions about our mind lives are not helpful at all, at least for those that really seek change, civilizational change, and deep cultural change. And when I talk, I mean, of course, talking about this, it's always talking about deep cultural change, deep political change, deep economic change. You know, that's not only when we talk about cultural, we of course talk about ideological. That is why we cannot. This is how difficult it is to understand, but it's the only way that we can really solve the problems. Otherwise, we get stuck. Because, as I said, culture has been built by special groups in our society for power control and wealth accumulation, that as a web of lies to manufacture consent, not as a web of trust, justice and truth, as it should be, and that used to be among the peoples, the so-called indigenous peoples and tribes that were living an economy, a sufficiency economy, and a reciprocity economy. That we need to have to use that model for a paradigm, for a civilizational paradigm that I call holistic ecologic civilization. And the word holistic is very important. It's not only ecological, but actually that's the same, that is reproducing the same models and the same concepts and worldviews and ideologies and systems that are the existing, the ones that are reproducing the cultural paradigms that do not allow us to move on. the culture we have it has been developed to serve the imperialist civilizational paradigm, which is obsolete, but is still the one that is dominant, as we can, as part of that the economic system, the capitalist economic system, is exactly represents the paradigm of civilization. It doesn't represent, it is the operating system of the imperialistic civilization paradigm, because that's why it needs to grow, to expand, to look for new resources, to control people, to control markets, and to grow, and to develop new technologies, and it's a never-ending process that can only accelerate, and we just accept it as the part of our condition, part of our fate. And that is not true. That is part of the web of lies, the web of deception. But how can we really understand it as to transform it into to have critical mass, to be politically, economically, and culturally transformative? That's the main, in my opinion, that's the main issue. How can we do it? And that's what I honestly do not see discussed. Exactly because it's exactly the point. Because there are lacking perspectives. Because it can take a long time to human beings. It doesn't matter how smart we are. Sometimes to see a detail that changes our perspective, that allows us to see the full picture, or at least to have a picture that illustrates a reality as it really is, not as the dominant culture sells it. And this is true in everything, and people know it. Scientists can be years struggling and then they cannot find it because it's missing. There is missing something is missing that doesn't allow to discover the law or whatever it is. So this is exactly why we get stuck, because we have a tunnel vision. That's what culture does. Because if you don't have a culture that is intentionally and consciously built as a web of trust, truth, and justice, of course, we are building, we are instrumentalized to manufacture consent. And we don't think about the water, okay, about the environment where we swim, okay, where we dwell, and we much less think about how our culture has the ability to transform ourselves. Because we tend to believe that somehow we as we see it, as we perceive ourselves, this self perception of ourselves, it gives us an idea, a wrong idea actually, that we live above, that we are kind of a supervisor, a super ego, you know, that we live above this reality, that our true identity, our true self is above this reality, and can scan it and find the flaws and the mistakes, and no, it doesn't work like that. How do we build? How does that super entity, this super ego, this identity that we think it's ourselves, or we perceive it's ourselves, as that existence outside the living organism? How is that identity built? This is why I explore these topics, because I understand them as imperative, as absolutely central, essential, to not only to understand the cultural reality and the social reality, but to understand ourselves and have perspective and build perspective, because everything is a process. We need to build it. It's not just that we. This is not about understanding something. It's about the process that needs to be built to build that reality consciously. That we are aware of what we are doing and what's the objective. Otherwise, I don't see how can we fight back. That we expect we expect to change without organizing ourselves and uniting ourselves against the dominant powers. This is not about the system. This is about changing a system, or replacing a system that is based on power, control, and wealth accumulation. This is not a system that voluntarily changes, because the people at the top, and not only, and we have to understand that it's not only the 0.1%, not even only the 1%, at least 10% of the population, especially in the countries where there is where the economic development allowed to have consider an important upper middle class. So in many countries, or at least in some countries in the world, at least 10% of the population. And again, this is a cultural problem. Why? Because the other people that do not do 90% of the population, which is a very diverse and plural population is has been they are accomplices, because we have that culture that transforms us into accomplices, because we believe that there is the normal normal way to live is the way we live, is the primacy of private property. Even now we have this culture, the financialization of the economy, which is this is a parasitic. This is about destroying the real economy, and we just take it as part of. It's just natural, normal. We don't see it as a cancer. We should see it as a cancer, metastasizing everywhere, with the financialization of nature, of the ecosystem services and everything. But we don't. Why? Why do we see it as normal, and why do you think that we are so obsessed with private property about ownership and about all the entitlements, when for many of us there could be, for the majority of us, it would be much better to have a different system where you would not need to fight to pay mortgages, where you could have a house without the need to pay a mortgage. Why do we need to have the house to belong to us? There are certain things that we need to be private and to own it as private items. Nobody wants to take it away, at least nobody with some sanity. But why can't we understand this or discuss it? No, we cannot discuss it, because this is the prevalent culture. This is dominant. And why is it dominant? Because it's part of who we are. It's organic. It has become a reality. It is part of the economic reality, political reality, but also about the flesh reality. It's not only conceptual. That's why a narrative. That's why we need to understand the identity as an organic entity that is part of our. It's biological. And that's why it's so strong, it's so powerful. And it doesn't matter if you understand things. That's why I always say that we can understand many things intellectually, and why don't we change? Because the dominant narratives, the dominant culture is organically, is biologically controlling us. And that's why this situation only changes when we consciously train ourselves with different narratives until a different narrative becomes dominant. It's like a process of any form of disintoxication that we need to go through that long process until we recover new habits, and in this case it's new narratives, new habits of life. And you don't feel anymore the addiction that before was taking a toll on you. And this is how this reality works. Because we just understand reality through the lens of commodification and convenience. That's how we understand reality. And ourselves. That's why we have a market, a job market, a human resource market. and we just take everything as normal and natural and part of the human condition. There's nothing we can do because this is how we operate, and that's it. The point is, if we do not go deep enough to these roots where the problems are originated, we are not able to unite and organize in order to create the critical mass that is necessary to really have political strength and political agency in order to change, to have a transformative change, to really be able to challenge the powers that be. And this cannot be done only individually and by individuals. Doesn't matter how charismatic they are. It needs to be organized, grassroots organizations, and it needs to be international, transnational, because otherwise it's not going to work. There needs to be this deep transformation, deep cultural transformation. That is required. But for those that think that we can keep the capitalist system, and I'm not talking about a market economy. We can have a socialist market economy or something. We can have a market economy that does not necessarily is based on the maximization of profit and accumulation of wealth and the primacy of private property and the inheritance rights and everything else that goes with capitalism. That has never been about giving those rights to the poor. It's just to making us accomplices. This is another important perspective, to understand that we are being used as accomplices. In order to use us against anybody of our class, of the working class or of the working poor or the destitute people that say something different, we are the enemies because we are against private property, because we are against this, we are against that. Instead of trying to understand why do we have this perspective. We are called jealous and and parasites and this and that and so on and so forth. And then these people, they do not understand how deep. This is not only about indoctrination again, this is about how indoctrination operates to have a transformative process that is organic, is biological. And okay, that's it. That's the main point. This is not the main point. This is part of. This is an ecosystem of points. This is not about one point that is more important than other. This is about an ecosystem where we need to understand it as a web, as a web of against the web of a web of knowledge, against the web of deception that rules our lives. And that's my point. And I'm going to end here for today. This is an issue that requires, of course, continuation, and it will happen at some point in the future. Thanks for listening, and I will be back soon.